Thank you all for attending today. As the last session, I know this is a hard one to make, especially when it's kind of keeping you from cocktails and dinner. So I really appreciate you guys being here for this session. So in this session, we really want to talk about how to keep your residents safe in circumstances of workplace violence. And workplace violence kind of runs the gamut from active shooter to domestic dispute to resident on employee violence and everything in between, really. And so we really need to address, because it seems to be happening more and more, right? You see it, you see the news, the news blurbs about, people being shot, active violence happening all the time. It's happening more and more. And unfortunately, a lot of time, it's a big target is healthcare. And healthcare, because of the fact that healthcare is dominated by, females. It's a female industry. There's, a good population of those that work within healthcare systems are female, and a lot of violence is perpetrated from male to female. A lot of the spousal issues and things like that you see, those incidents happen from, a male spouse to a female. So there is a high occurrence of that in healthcare. So it's something we have to look at, and again, all aspects of it. One of the major focuses that we have in assisted living is the combative resident scenario when we have memory care residents, or not even memory care, AL happens in AL and IL as well, and we have to address that adequately. So we're going to first talk about some data, instances that we've seen, in the news or otherwise over the last few years, and again, it's increasing. We're seeing the increasing frequency of these types of incidents. It's not going away. We can't put our heads in the sand, and it's something we do have to address. We're going to talk about the different types of workplace violence incidents, as I explained earlier. This is not just the active shooter scenario. It's all, again, the resident violence, families coming in being irate about the care or miscare of their loved ones, and so on. So we're going to talk about the different types. Talk about safety issues and risk mitigation strategies. So what do you do? Like, how do you, what kind of policies do you have in place? What kind of training are you providing your employees? It is really critical. So we'll talk about the elements of a good active violence preparedness plan. And part of that, a lot of that is really getting people to do tabletop drills. Walking them through. I mean, everybody in this room has probably heard of run, hide, fight, right? The response for active violence. But do you really know what you would do in a scenario when you do have an active shooter in your building? Or in the everyday occurrence, resident strikes an employee, there's a resident violence situation. How do you address that situation? How do you talk to the employee? How do you understand what happened? How do you try to prevent it from happening in the future? So your policies and protocols, procedures really need to address these issues that happen within your communities. And then the last part of it, we'll talk about insurance considerations, like what types of policies kick in when you do have these types of events that are compensable, when you need to make a claim. There's all sorts of coverages that can apply in those scenarios. So we'll talk about that as well. So just a quick review of some incidents, notable incidents that have happened over the last 20 or so years. 2009, North Carolina, shooter enters a nursing home, kills 7 residents, 1 nurse, wounding 3 others, right? The typical active shooter scenario that we see that's splashed on the news headlines, right? 2009, that happened in North Carolina. 2015 in Oregon, 75-year-old man with dementia and independent living shot his wife of 57 years. Allegedly, the man, who was a former police chief and county sheriff in Texas, didn't know the gun was loaded. He was playing, and this man was, I guess, diagnosed with early onset or with dementia, an aggressive form of dementia. So he was changing rapidly. I just did the research on that. I was trying to find out the information on this one again to get an update. And anyway, so that's a unique situation. In Ohio, gunmen entered a nursing home and killed 2 employees and a police chief. The assailant had a record of domestic abuse violence. That's something that, again, background checks and things like that. Are we doing those kinds of things? I don't know that, this is, again, it's like could be a resident's family member, but again, something that we have to consider. How good are our background checks? You know, are we doing that? Are we doing anything for the residents that come into our communities as well? Do we know what their background is? In Rhode Island, a resident in an assisted living community opened fire, killing one associate and injuring an associate and a resident. In Maryland in 2021, gunman entered an assisted living community, killing 2 associates. He reported being fed up with how the residents were treated. In 2024, Ohio, 2 employees shot by a resident at a senior living facility. And then in Baltimore this year, a 75-year-old resident was found dead in his apartment, and a 72-year-old man was critically injured. A 65-year-old resident was taken into custody regarding this incident. So, you know, we're going back to 2009. I'm sure there's a bunch of more incidents before 2009 as well. And what's alarming as well, a lot of these active violence scenarios go underreported in healthcare as well. We're going to talk about that a little later too. It's like, how are you tracking these incidents? So we do need some transparency. We need some way to track the events that happen within our communities. Because if we know that they're happening, we're better apt to try to prevent it from happening in the future. We need to understand how these events are happening. Now, the active shooter scenario, when somebody comes in randomly to our community, that's something that's, you can't really, you know, prevent, but, you know, what do we do in those events as well? Some more information here and background on risks of workplace violence in the senior living industry. In 2018, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics found that healthcare workers are 5 times more likely to be victimized on the job than any other workers overall, and that healthcare workers accounted for 73% of non-fatal workplace injuries and illnesses due to violence, like you talked about. That female-dominated field healthcare, you know, so we see a lot more incidents happening in healthcare. We talked about the underreporting of incidents in healthcare. In 2017, among adults 65 and older, 33% own a gun. Another 12% live in a household with somebody who owns a gun, so they have access. And then by 2050, an estimated 8 to 12 million people with dementia may live in homes with guns. So again, think about also, do you have policies for, you know, firearms within your buildings as well? Do you prevent them from coming into the building? Do you prevent a new resident that's coming in to have and own a firearm within the community as well? Approximately 30 to 50% of people with dementia and up to 80% in congregate care can exhibit combative behavior over the course of their condition. So that's a norm. That's something we have to address. So it is a constant. Okay, the different types of workplace violence. So you know, I guess kind of give you an overview of workplace violence. The definition of workplace violence is any act or threat of physical violence, harassment, intimidation, or other threatening, disruptive behavior that occurs at the work site. Okay, what does that mean? We obviously know, you know, physical violence that happens, but the threat of physical violence, harassment, intimidation, bullying, right? When you have maybe employee on employee bullying situations or supervisor on employee bullying situations. Are we aware of that? Are we letting our employees know that when you're having when these scenarios exist, are they reporting it to their superiors, to their supervisors? Or if their supervisor is perpetrating that violence or that bullying scenario, are they going higher up to, let's say, the executive director or even the corporate HR if needed? Workplace violence ranges from threats of verbal abuse to physical assault, and including homicide. The third leading cause of fatal occupational injuries in the United States, and it can involve employees, clients, and customers. Okay, so that's basically the third leading cause of fatal injuries. Okay. So, how is this regulated? It widely is not regulated, but there are states that do have regulations on the book. I would say the most inclusive or restrictive, I don't know how you want to call it, regulation on the books for any state is California. Cal-OSHA has a regulation for workplace violence that's been on the books in healthcare since, I think it was 2017 when that came into play, maybe 2012. But anyway, California's a very progressive state. They have a lot of regulations, and that's one of the regulations they have. In Florida, there are laws requiring employers to implement safety measures and report incidents of workplace violence, especially in healthcare. So it's kind of a general guideline. There's nothing specific there that's going to tell you got to do certain things. If you look at the regulation itself, it does give you some guidelines, but I don't believe that it's strictly enforced. Okay, another type of workplace violence would be criminal intent. So again, primary motive in a lot of cases would be theft. I always ask when I go into my operators' communities, I'll ask, I'm oftentimes there to do like safety audits, mock OSHA inspections, I look at fleet safety, everything in between. One of the first things I do when I come into the community is I walk in and I go right past the desk. I want to see how they respond to me. Do they notice me? Do they say anything to me? Do they ask me to stop? Do they ask me to sign in a book? Is there anyone there to tell me to do that? Or can I walk right into the community and do whatever I want to do? I always say, if you do have, again, your procedure should be pretty simple. When somebody comes in the community, someone should be there to ask the question, hello, how are you? Who are you here to see, or what are you here for, and who are you here to meet? And if they can't answer those two questions, they shouldn't be in the community. Very plain and simple. It doesn't have to be very complicated policy. And then make sure they sign in to have a record of who they are, what they're there for, and so on. And then you've got a time stamp of again, their being there. I see the electronic kiosks, which are nice. Those came into play a lot more when COVID hit, because they had the temperature monitors and things like that. So I see as a carryover from the COVID days, I still see that that's those systems in place. They can print out the name badges and everything else. Those are nice as well. But it doesn't have to be a sophisticated system, electronic system. It's very simple. Just ask them why they're there and who they're there to meet. So again, theft is a primary motive. You'll see this a lot. Someone coming in, again, trying to steal things from residents' rooms is an easy target, right? You're a soft target. If you have someone with the wherewithal to understand that they can come in, they can go into residents' rooms, they can ransack the rooms, and nobody's going to check on them, it's an easy target for them. So they might come off as being, a vendor that, maybe they have scrubs on, or maybe they have a uniform on to do, maintenance work and things like that in the community. So you just have to be careful. There are people out there with criminal intent, and we got to watch out for that. Resident to caregiver violence. This is the big one. This is what happens every day in senior living communities. And how do we address this? Well, first and foremost, we need to track it. We need to let our associates know that when we do have an incident where a resident kicks, bites, scratches, punches, and anything in between, if there is an act of violence against them, they need to let their supervisor and the director know. If we don't know, we can't track it, we can't understand why it's happening, and it's going to happen again. Training for staff, really important. How quickly do we have that caregiver on the floor working with residents? Are they getting that adequate training before they actually work with those residents to understand dementia, to understand how to readdress a situation when the resident is obviously showing signs of agitation, as that's oftentimes there's precursors to that active, that violent situation that happens, that kick, that punch, scratch, the bite even. So we do have to provide training to our caregivers on this. And also, again, to analyze and look at these incidents that occur. Because when they occur with frequency, same resident, same, and there's going to be different, maybe the trigger is that resident doesn't want to get up at 8 in the morning to go to breakfast, one scenario I had with a client, they were trying to figure out why it was happening. This caregiver apparently looked exactly like this resident's older sister, and he didn't like the older sister. So that was kind of an easy fix. It's like, okay, you're not going to take care of Mr. Smith. We're going to have you assigned to other residents. But we have to understand why these events occur. And then on the rare occasion when we do have a violent resident that just, it doesn't matter what we do and they keep acting out, we got to figure out how to deal with that. Do they have to be transferred to another facility because they're just violent individuals that you can't control or you can't readdress, you can't provide the care you need because they're always acting out with aggression. We have also, agitated family members that might come in and threaten our staff as well. We really have to understand when those situations happen. We have to document those situations. We have to make sure we address that. And sometimes, get others involved. Having sit-down conversations, if we can, after a heated incident occurs, have to sit down with the family and explain, we can't have this. If this happens again, or you're going to be banned from the community, we can't have you in here doing this, that kind of thing. And also, obviously figure out the reason why they're agitated, number one. But we just can't have these types of events happening. We also have the worker-to-worker violence. So why are these events happening? Is it a bullying situation? What is it? Obviously you can, terminate an employee for cause when they're fighting with other caregivers. But again, this is something that we need to be, when we're providing the training to staff, they need to understand all types of violence. When they think of workplace violence, do they just think about the active shooter situation, or do they think about the residents portraying violence against them? They have to understand the whole gamut of everything, and understand that when they recognize it, report it. Really important. Before it comes to a head, before it comes to a really that splashy headline on the news, active shooting situation or active violence situation. Domestic violence. Unfortunately, this is probably the most common cause of the active shooter scenarios. Is domestic violence. You have custody battles, divorces, separations, breakups, okay, and oftentimes that will carry over into the workplace. One of the things that I tell my clients is, and the communities, when I talk about workplace violence, is really tap into the the employee assistance programs that you have. Raise a hand. How many have employee assistance programs? How many of you promote those programs with your staff? Okay, let them know about it. If there's things that are causing them stress that could spill over into the workplace, right? That's a risk. So this is a free service to them, and we have to promote it. If you're not promoting it, put up flyers on bulletin boards. Make sure when you hire them, you remind them that they have this service that can help them with various reasons, financial, again, if there's anything going on spousal, protection-wise, things like that, they can reach out. And also to reach out to you, to the community, if you're the leaders at the community, for help. They may be embarrassed that they have a spouse that is being violent with them, okay, with domestic abuse. But if they take it as far as to say, get an order of protection against their former spouse, the person they just broke up with, whatever the situation is, encourage them to let you know about that. Because, it's a private situation, they're not required to do that, right? There's privacy there. But in a situation where that person could come into the facility looking for them and being violent, then, you know, I would encourage your staff to say, we need to know about that. Let's get a picture of this individual. If there's a restraining order, we need to know about it. We need to put it at the front desk. So if we see this individual, we're not gonna fool around. We're gonna call 911 and have the police here because they're not supposed to be here. So again, this is one of those things that is a constant. It's just always there. You never know when it's gonna happen, and encourage your staff to report that to you to kind of help with those situations. And also as a pressure relief valve for a lot of stressful things that might be going on in their life, whether it's financial or personal, that employee assistance program could be a big help. Okay, so safety issues in senior living, in terms of the different aspects of it, environmental, residence, employee, and practices here. So when I look through the community, I do a walkthrough, I'm looking at various things to see how safe and secure the community is. Do we have a safety alert system, right? Do you have, I don't know, a phone app perhaps that you can, you know, hit and communicate to everybody there's an active shooter in the building or something like that? Do you have panic buttons at the front desk? And again, maybe not necessary for every community, but if you're in like let's say an urban setting, that you do have crime and violence in the immediate area, or even if it's not an urban, if it's a rural, but the crime level is high, having a panic button at the front desk might be something you need to consider. You might need to consider security guards in certain situations. I just had a client call me, you know, this last week. They had a violent situation with a former employee that they had terminated, and he said he was going to come back, and he threatened gun violence, and they had security. You know, they called us, and you know, and our security experts. We got armed guards at the front desk, you know, for a period of time until things cooled down with that individual. I believe they still, this is like last week, so I think they're going to have those armed guards there you know, for about a week or two after this incident, so they figure out exactly what's going to happen here. Access control. How are people getting in and out of your building? Is it doors open policy? You know, I was just walking through a community last week, and one of the things that I put in my report to them was like, well, you know, the front door, you know, is open, and you have concierge there, but you have your back door open too. There's two buildings. They had a assisted living and a memory care building, two different buildings. Memory care was tight as a drum, as it usually is, but the assisted living building had open doors on both sides. So anybody could have come in through the back door, and in the front door, there was no concierge. And so who knows, and all they had was a visitor sign-in sheet. But I walked right past that sign-in sheet. No one asked me what I was doing. And so again, this is something to think about. Like, what are your protocols? How are we preventing people that are not supposed to be in our community from getting into our community? So access control is important. Do you have an open campus design? If you do have an open campus design, how do you figure out ways to limit access? I have certain clients of mine that will have like key fob entries. So residents will have key fobs to get in and out instead of just a wide open door. And the same key fob system is nice because it can be programmed for vendors that come in. Vendor comes in, here's your key fob. You're only allowed to access these doors at these times, and you know, otherwise that key fob doesn't work. Same thing with employees. Employees come in, you know, they have a key fob. Let's say if they're terminated, that key fob is terminated. They can go on the computer and lock them out again. So they can't use that key fob if they don't turn it in. I often see doors propped open, especially in the kitchen. Smoke breaks, right? I'm going to take a smoke break. I'm going to put that brick in the door. I'm going to walk out a couple feet and have my smoke break. You know, not a good idea. We always talk about this. You can't have doors propped open. And I'll look for signs, and you can look for signs in your community. Do you see a brick or a large rock next to your doors on the exteriors of your building? Okay, that's very often a sign that someone is doing that on a regular basis. So check your doors periodically throughout your building to see if people are propping those doors open. Limited exterior lighting. How does your lighting look at night? When you have your caregivers coming off shift, second shift, okay, and they're going to the parking lot, how's the lighting in that parking lot, in the employee parking lot? Are the shrubs maintained so people can't hide, assailants can't hide in shrubbery and things like that? So do you have motion sensing lights? So when people are moving on there, you know, it's a nice bright light that lights up that area. Things to consider. Do you have policies to say, hey, when you're leaving the community at 2, 3 in the morning or whatever, are you going out in pairs to your vehicles? Is someone accompanying you to your vehicle, or are you going out alone? Obstructed walkways. You know, we certainly want to maintain our walkways nice and clear for emergency egress purposes. Motion sensors I talked about, trees and shrubs, internal visibility of hallways. Sometimes if it's hard to see around the corner and get people bumping into each other or whatever, for better visibility, you can put a convex mirror around the corners to see, especially near entrances and things like that, to see who's coming in, if that's a situation that you have. And then take a look at the businesses and buildings surrounding the community in terms of evaluation, right? Do you have things that would invite violence into the community? Liquor stores or, things like that could, again, just trying to think of different situations where, if you've got a busy, it's nightlife is going on until like 2 in the morning. Could that bring, someone into your community that, perhaps has been overserved or something like that as well? And then what are your procedures for lockdown? Okay, do you have a lockdown procedure? So if you had, let's say, civil disturbance again, or scenarios where you could have violence coming into the community, do you have a procedure for locking down? If you get a notice that there's a catastrophic event or an active shooter event that's outside of the community, are you able to lock down the community? Do you have automatic doors, or does somebody go and manually lock those doors within your community to keep the staff and residents safe? Things to think about. Some other safety issues and things that we want to talk to, on the resident side, are residents keeping their doors wide open? Okay, very simply, if they lock their doors, then again, the theft situation where someone randomly comes into the community and just ransacks a bunch of rooms, stealing jewelry and whatever they can get their hands on, if the residents simply lock their doors like they would have in their own personal homes, then that could avoid those scenarios as well, keeping their rooms a little bit more secured. Not utilizing the peephole in the door. Okay, if they have a peephole to look and see who's at the door, they can understand who's there. Not drawing curtains at night. Allowing unsolicited people or contractors to enter uncontrolled or to tailgate into the community. Holding doors open for unknown people. Again, when we talk about training, these are some of the things we want to talk about in terms of preventing workplace violence and preventing, again, theft and other people, assailants, into the community. How long are visitors spending overnights in the community? Do we have family members that are coming in to the community and staying overnight? Something to think about. This last week, I had a client call and said that they had the resident's son was staying in his mother's room, and then was using the bathtub to try to make meth. Real scenario, okay? So, how are we keeping track of these scenarios, and when we're notified of these scenarios, what are we doing about it? Okay. Employees, sometimes, again, the second and third shift, they're working understaffed, many people in one area, such as mealtime activities, high worker turnover, access control. When, again, how often are we changing codes, access codes into secure units? I recommend at least quarterly that those numbers be changed, and then anytime that a staff member is terminated for cause, the number should be changed. So I don't know how often that happens. I review it. This is something I regularly review with my clients, and typically it's the maintenance director that's in charge of that. And the protocol should be at least, again, like I said, at least quarterly, and then whenever someone is termed. Let's see. The big one, lack of training on escalation for behaviors. Again, like with the situation where we have resident violence on staff. So we really need better training on that in some situations. And then maybe it's not the initial training that was a problem. It's just we'll have to do retraining because it didn't take with that employee. They didn't follow their training. They went back to old habits, or they just disregarded the training or didn't pay attention to it. So maybe retraining. And then sometimes it's, progressive discipline. Even if they're hurt, right? If they're not following the training and procedures we give them to avoid these scenarios, that's going to happen. So investigating, figure out why they happened is important as well. Okay, some good practices here: maintain good lighting for building grounds, parking lots, exit doors, educate residents on the surrounding area if they're unfamiliar. So if there are security risks in areas that you don't recommend people to go, we want to educate people, not just kind of pretend that it doesn't exist. If we know that there are issues in the areas that we want residents to stay away from. We want, like homelessness, right? I go out to California quite a bit. I've got a lot of clients in California. There are homeless or unhomed encampments in California, quite a bit of them. And so letting our residents know, hey, it's not safe to go outside of the fenced-in area of our community, right? There are, unhomed people out there that again, you're putting yourself at risk. And talk the same about, with your staff, and say, you want to do certain things a certain way. You don't want to make, and report when you do see, certain things that should be taken care of. Call the police. One community, I couldn't believe this. They told me that the homeless people or unhomed people were in front of the community taking a garden hose, undressing and washing themselves right in front of the community. Like it was right next to the parking lot. So it's a little crazy, but how are we addressing that? Screening protocols for visitors and vendors. If someone is out of place, report it. See something, say something, like I talked about. Are you managing your access points? Sign in. I talked about that as well. Having strict policies on that is important. Having law enforcement come and provide a safety talk on safety and security is good. Get them involved. Get their advice on what to do in active shooter scenarios and training. Obviously, don't do I've heard disaster stories with them actually running an actual drill and acting like they're an active shooter. You don't want to do that, but just kind of tabletop drills and discussions about what they would do in certain situations, and making sure that you're coordinated, right? So if you did have an active shooter scenario, if you're in lockdown, how do the police communicate with us? What is their coordination of their activities? What can we expect from them in those situations? How fast can they be there? Again, staff training is important. And I talked about tabletop drills. Tabletop drills are important. When do we end here? I just want to make sure I'm keeping with my time. 4:45? 5:35. 5:35. Okay, good. I've got 15 minutes. All right. With active violence or active shooter, it's a scenario, obviously, that everybody's familiar with these days, and we really can't ignore it. It is there. It is a potential risk that all of us face, no matter where we are, no matter what we're doing. Okay? So we really unfortunately have to prepare for these scenarios. So raise of hands, how many of you do an active shooter training with your staff or have policies on active shooter? Okay. Back with my previous employer, we actually produced a whole program called the 4 Outs, and a training, and it just kind of helped to prepare communities for the active shooter scenario. You do need to, train your staff on what they would do. I do like the tabletop exercises where, and I always tell people, like, make it simple. You don't have to really make this very complicated. You've got the run, hide, fight, okay, which is, there's an active shooter, okay, you either get out, okay, if you can, safely exit the community, which, if you've got to protect residents, is probably not a good idea, right? You want to be there to help your residents. So that's not always the best scenario in a senior living community. So hide, or again, would be, let's close the door that we're in, lock the door, barricade the door, protect yourself that way. And that's the most common response that you would have in an active shooter scenario, unless you're faced directly with the active shooter in that situation. And that's the fight scenario, where you do everything that you can to prevent that shooter from shooting you, right? And so you're picking up a chair and throwing it at them. You're using weapons of opportunity. You'd even pick up a computer or anything just to kind of take that mindset away from that active shooter to, again, save yourself. I mean, in those situations, there's only, that's all you can really do, is just try to protect yourself. So again, talking to staff about that, and when I talk about these tabletop drills, you say, the easiest thing you can do is say, all right, what do you do every day? Just picture in your mind your daily routine work that you're performing, right? You're working with a resident. You're showering a resident, dressing them, assisting them with ADLs. Housekeeper, you're cleaning up a resident's room or a hallway. Dining staff, you're preparing for the lunch hour. Maintenance staff, you're working on repairing a toilet in a resident's room, right? Okay, two different scenarios here. You hear gunshots. What do you do? What is your reaction? How are you going to react? Think about it mentally. What am I going to do? I'm in a resident's room. Are you going to go to that door, shut it, lock it, barricade it? That's a good response. Could I open up the window and get out of the facility? If I know that shooter's in the facility, can I get out of the facility? But again, if we're trying to protect our residents as well, it's going to be more of that, lock and barricade situation. Keep that active shooter, active assailant out. And then the other part of it is, okay, in that daily routine, the active shooter is there in front of you. What do you do in that situation if they're actively shooting? And again, it's that fight situation. So, the weapons of opportunity that you have, staplers, anything, sitting in your desk, chairs. I talked about the male on female, in terms of the active violence. 95% of attackers are male, or 97%, I should say. So, unfortunately, that is a pretty big pattern there, and a big number, 97%. A lot of them are the domestic violence situations as well. So again, having programs, training is important. In terms of preparedness, evaluate your communities where they're at, and each community is different. Because you can't just take hey, we're going to just put out a corporate policy and everybody's going to take the same policy. You may have more exposure in certain communities than you have in other communities in terms of their propensity for active violence or somebody coming into the community perpetrating active violence. So do a needs assessment, a job hazard assessment, if you will. So certain jobs are going to be more at risk, right? If you're at the front door, you might be more at risk than somebody else who's back in a secured memory care unit, right? Put out surveys to employees, asking them what are their concerns. Where are they worried? What are they worried about? Is it that going out to the parking lot at 2 in the morning, it's dark? The employee parking lot or the area where employees park is very dark and the lights are out, that kind of thing. Report and track all injuries to residents and or employees. Again, we can't do anything about the things we don't know about, so make sure we're really promoting that. We want them to report situations, even if it's threats, verbal, email, electronic communication. We need to know about these things. If you don't have a plan, a formal written plan, you should have one. And again, philosophy, whether it's run, hide, fight, avoid, deny, defend, the 4 outs, have a philosophy on how you're going to handle active violence situations. Have a multidisciplinary threat team or safety committee, so you have HR, security, legal, risk management, from the corporate level, get involved to think about all aspects of the scenario, right, for active violence and how we would address it. Unfortunately, you have to think after a scenario like this, like how do you deal with the aftermath, the cleanup, the counseling with staff that are going to be affected by the situation and so on. You may want to consider, stop the bleed training. That's, when you do have an active shooter situation, someone's hurt on the floor, how do we, keep that person alive until paramedics can get to the scene. So they talk about stop the bleed, which is basically an extreme kind of first aid to make sure that we can stop the bleeding, to save that person before EMS gets there. Train and validate competency. So when you go through the drills, again, the tabletops, making sure people understand what their roles are and what they're due. And really, just the overall goal is preservation of life, right? Okay. We already talked about this. It's kind of analyzing the areas that your communities are in to see if we have that propensity. Is there, a high occurrence of vandalism, cars being broken into, assaults, things like that from a security standpoint? Are we evaluating the area for that security risk? And if we do have a higher propensity for those events, then we need to make sure that we're addressing it properly, putting in more security measures and things like that. In terms of the 3 things that you want to have: communication, collaboration, and train. So communication with employees, residents, families, responsible parties, making sure everybody's on the same page with what we're doing here, what our plan is. Collaborate, make sure that we're working with local law enforcement to address the various scenarios that we're talking about in terms of active assailant. And then train and drill with employees, residents, and families. Again, always important, making sure everybody's on the same page. All right, well, I'm going to leave the last, I have a couple of slides to go through, but it's kind of more repetition of the things that, that we had talked about. I do want to give a couple of minutes for any questions that you might have. This slide up here is just kind of talking about some additional things that you might want to consider in terms of, I think I talked about this, but have you thought about a crisis communication plan? When an event happens like this, do we have a crisis management plan? Do we have, what are our procedures to make sure that we're handling counseling, we're communicating with families? How do you communicate with families of residents and staff that have been lost to an active violence situation or have been hurt? And again, how do we get a hold of them? How do we account for people? And so on. Unfortunately, it's just something we have to think about these days. Any questions that we have? This other stuff is kind of less importance on the claim side and the insurance side. We can go through that. Unless do you guys have any questions at this point? I want to make sure we address anything you guys have. Any particular scenarios you're worried about with your communities? Things you need to address? I do recommend if you do have questions or need to put a plan together, reach out to security professionals, reach out to consultants, whether it's your insurance broker, your insurance carriers. There's a lot of people out there that have good information to share, policies to share on preventing workplace violence incidents. I know that we have policies, procedures. We have security consultants who will go out and do a security evaluation of your building or various communities that might be of concern. So again, tap into the resources that you have. You might not have to pay for additional resources. It might be there at your disposal. with your insurance broker, your insurance carrier, and other professionals. But in terms of the different lines of coverage, if you did have an active shooter violence situation, you've got your workers' compensation policy that's a no-fault insurance that's going to cover incidents that occur to your employees. General and professional liability might kick in certain situations. Umbrella, excess casualty, property and business interruption if there's damage to the property of one of these events. Public relations, crisis management, counseling could be part of additional services that are provided to you by the insurance carrier in these events as well. Terrorism coverage could be triggered as well, and then active assailant coverage is a separate standalone coverage that you might have. So again, these are things to consider. In terms of a good plan, be proactive, train, practice, all right? Assign roles and responsibilities. Have people to understand what they're to do, what their roles are in an active violence situation. Formalize processes and plans. Collaborate with stakeholders, both internal and external. Your staff, your residents' families, police. Okay. Ongoing communication regarding awareness of potential community issues. Again, when we see an uptick in crime in the area, we need to be aware of that and understand it and prepare for it. Train and validate. Do your drills. Tabletop is good. When we talk about active shooter, don't do an active drill. Do a tabletop drill. And then periodically reevaluate the program, the plan. It might be sitting at your desk and might be collecting dust for 5 years. Let's look at it again. Let's talk about it. How many of you have active safety committees at your communities? You should. That's something the safety committees can get involved in talking about and exploring, looking at the details of the plan, editing that plan, updating it to make sure it's realistic and makes sense. And again, the ultimate goal of the plan is to minimize loss of life. Got some additional resources here, just background information and assessment tools that might be helpful to you. I believe that these presentations are shared with participants here, the attendees. I'm not sure that there is a code. I didn't get a code to put on there, but do we have a code for the session? Because I saw in the last session they had a code, and I was kind of an add-in about 2 weeks ago, so I didn't realize we had to put a code on the end.
Thank you so much, Scott.
You're welcome.